Um, and I was actually on a train coming back from Virginia Beach and doing our campaign work. So I did not see any uh, Halloween costumes. So I look forward to seeing what other people saw and enjoyed. But before we get into the numbers, just want to take a step back and explain why CCAN decided to get involved in the midterm elections. As we know from our state work in Virginia and Maryland, the only way we pass climate legislation is when we have a Democratic trifecta. And so the last 2 years, we've had that trifecta. And so we were able to really move the conversation on climate and renewable energy and clean energy, and ultimately led to the passing the Inflation Reduction Act. And so we wanted to make sure that we protected the folks who voted in favor of the IRA, as well as we know that the IRA was not perfect. And we need to improve it and keep taking more actions. So we needed another trifecta in this upcoming Congress. And so we wanted to make sure we were doing our part in our region. And therefore, we endorsed three candidates this cycle, two in Virginia, which were Elaine Loria and Abigail Spanberger, and then one in Maryland, David Trump. And we won two of those three elections. And, we were really proud of the work that we did, even though we didn't get the outcome that we wanted for the overall Congress, as well as not with Elaine Loria, but we were able to really make a mark. So what did we exactly do? So in Virginia's 2nd District, which was one of the closest elections, predicted to be one of the closest races anywhere in the country. So that's where we put our resources and our energy. So we made 47,705 calls, whether it was through paid volunteers or our own CCAN volunteers. Maybe some of you on this call participated in those calls, but we made 47,000 of them. We also sent 25,946 text messages. And between those two, we were able to identify 5,202 pledges who said that they would vote for Elaine Loria. And about 1,000 of those folks actually early voted. We haven't gotten the final number of how many of those ultimately voted, whether through mail-in ballots or on election day. But our goal was to generate an additional 1,000 votes for Loria, and we did exactly that just in early voting. Also, we use this relatively new technique called vote tripling, which is when someone votes and they come out, you engage them in a conversation and get them to text 3 friends or family members to get them to also come vote. And we got 377 people to vote triple right in front of us. We got numerous more commitments, but we didn't count those in this total. So at the very least, we know over 1,000 people got a text from a friend or a family member to go vote that might not have been on anybody's list. And then we ran a bunch of social media ads where we got 2.3 million Facebook impressions that covered over 200,000 unique people. So that means people were seeing our ads, a minimum of 7 times. Some people got more than 10. So we did a lot to really push. And in a second, you'll see the impact we had in our target precincts. And then in Virginia's 7th District, we made 20,493 dials, sent 6,946 text messages, and got 2,894 pledges. And Spanberger won by 11,000 votes. So certainly we had an impact there as well. Next slide. So what was our actual impact? CCAN is a small organization, and so we didn't have the resources to really play the entire congressional district. So we selected key precincts across those districts that we could really have an impact. And so we selected precincts that were very close for Democrats in 2020, and that we would focus our climate and democracy message and drive out additional votes in those 34 precincts, or in the case of the 7th District, 32 precincts. And so that's what we did. That's where we did our phone calls, our text messaging. That's where we sent the majority of our social media ads. And so of the 34 precincts that we focused on, we won 28 of those 34 precincts. And on average, we added those precincts performed 7 points better than the other precincts that we did not target. And then we identified 351 people who were highly interested in climate issues. So what we can do with that list going forward, we can add them to our CCAN list. We can engage them for future campaigns. And so we have just expanded our universe for any work that we want to do in Virginia going forward. And then you can see on the Virginia side, we won 20, on the Virginia 7th District side, we won 29 of 32. We really were able to push people there and performed 20 points better in our target precincts. And we identified 536 people. And so on the next slide, you can actually see the precincts. And so that first column in red are where the Republicans won in 2020. And then you can see in the second column there in blue where we flipped them. So you can see we flipped about in the 2nd Congressional District, about half of those precincts went for Republicans, and we were able to flip a significant amount of them. We were in the areas that were already blue, we were able to expand out our margins. And so we were really proud of the messaging that we had, the focus of our messaging, and it really taught us a lot of what we can do in the Hampton Roads area. And then the Virginia 7th District, you can see we did even better than we did in the 2nd. And so it really gave us, focusing on climate, which was one of the top 2 reasons why people showed up to vote, was really effective. And you can really see the impact of that messaging across these precincts and districts. And I just want to note that we also work with other organizations to sort of target our precincts accordingly. So even though we focused on these 34, we had other partners who were focusing on other precincts because we didn't want to overlap. So these were the 34 precincts and the 32 precincts that CCAN was given, and then our partners handle others, and they had different messaging. And you can kind of see that our climate messaging in these precincts was a much more effective messaging than some of the other issues that other groups were talking about.
Thank you so much, Coach. I really appreciate that perspective from the federal level. I'm going to talk a little bit about state level, because in Virginia, we have the privilege and the honor of having elections every year. So this past year gives us a little bit of a preview, albeit one that we should not overread, about the map that we'll face when the entire state Senate and the entire House of Delegates who pass our state legislation are up for election next year. So I'll explain this graph in 1 second, by the way. But for a brief bit of context, Democrats won both chambers of state government in 2019. That allowed them to pass a lot of policy, including huge progress on climate in 2020 and 2021. Republicans retook the state house last year. And while we have, some folks on both sides of the aisle that we can't necessarily assume will hold the party line, we did see last year that we're already, experiencing an uphill battle protecting the climate legislation that we passed in those 2 years. Not to mention a litany of other threats to social and racial justice and other issues that we don't care about. So you've heard from us, no doubt, about both executive and legislative attempts to repeal the greenhouse gas initiative, for example. So the graphic here shows the swing in each city and county from 2020 to 2022. So the last time Trump was on the ballot to this year. Obviously, most districts have gotten redder in between those 2 years. The good news, as Quentin pointed out, is that Democrats did much better in 2022 than we did in 2021, than we did last year for the governor's election, with nearly every Democrat in a swing seat outperforming Terry McAuliffe. But I did want to be honest about the fact that we're very much still a purple state, and we'll have to fight to win these elections. One important consequence of this past election is that Senate seat 7, that's Jen Kagan's seat, who won, unfortunately, against Luria, is now up for a special election for the 2023 session, and it's going to be run on the old map. The exact date of that election, which is in a district that's mostly Virginia Beach and incorporates a little bit of Norfolk, is not yet determined, but it would likely be right before session, possibly even the day before it. And it will probably, if prior elections are any indication, be a very close and a pretty low turnout election. And it will determine whether there is a 21-19 Democratic majority in the Senate or a 22-18 majority, as well as set up someone to have an incumbent advantage in the area for next year when everybody's up. Because we do have a few Democrats that we're worried about on climate issues, a 22-seat majority would be a lot more comfortable margin to protect the incredible progress we've made the last couple of years. So if you're calling in from Virginia Beach, I don't know if I saw anyone in the chat, but we'll need you. So feel free to reach out and we'll find ways to connect you with groups that will be active down there. And then, Virginia, like all other states, has been redistricted. So that adds a lot of uncertainty about how comfortable incumbents should feel in 2023. Some Democrats have already indicated they might not run with these new districts that are less favorable. Same thing on the Republican side. But for example, Senator Lewis, who carried the regional greenhouse gas initiative 5 or 6 years in a row until it eventually passed, as a significantly redder district, and it remains to be seen whether he will run again. Is anyone else having trouble with my audio? Okay, let me try unplugging my earphones. Are you able to hear me any better? Any better? Okay, if I need to, I can call in. So yeah, we'll remain to be seen whether Senator Lewis will be running in Virginia Beach, where Luria, unfortunately, as we mentioned, has lost her seat. So, and then Democrats in the Southwest, like Delegate Sam Rasool and Senator Edwards, both of whom focus on climate, may face tough battles, just given the map that we're seeing here and the sort of downward trend of turnout for Democrats in rural areas around some of these southwestern cities and southern cities. On the other hand, in terms of good news, youth turnout and turnout in general was very high this year in Virginia, and candidates who ran on issues like climate progress fared really well. Climate was overall tied for third in terms of the number of people who listed it as their most important issue countrywide, and that's tied with crime. So it's really getting the attention that I think it deserves on a national level. So increasing youth turnout for climate champions next year is going to be key to making sure that we have climate champions in the state legislature. So, overall, next year's elections will determine whether we keep our 100% clean energy law, whether we stay in RGGI, whether we keep clean car standards, whether we ban localities from electrifying homes, whether we can continue to work towards environmental justice, and whether we can truly invest in a just transition for fossil fuel communities. Virginia elected a lot of Democrats when Trump was in power, and without him, the pendulum has swung back a little bit. So my number one takeaway is how close these elections are going to be in Virginia next year, and how much it matters that we're able to get out our message about how much is at stake, both in the climate world and in so many of the other social justice issues which are important to us. So hopefully my audio improved a little bit. I'm going to pass it back to Quentin to sift through some of the questions that folks submitted in advance.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. So the first question.
Hey, Quentin, I can't hear you.
Can others hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So one question, the first question here is, can we push Rob Whitman for more environmental action since this is his background, even though it's not his party? That's a great question. I think that's the right direction we should be thinking. As we know, Republicans are probably not going to take any action on climate or environmental action at all, but they can try to undo some things. And it's going to be really key for us, especially with a thin majority in the House. And even though, there's still a very outside shot that Democrats can hold on to the House, Republicans are 1 seat away from the majority. And we need to identify a block of Republicans that we can move to block anything and play defense for the next 2 years. And I think Whitman is definitely someone that could be part of that block. I know he won his district by 14 points, but we can still encourage him and say, there's a political price for, undoing the things that were done in the IRA or any of the other things that we accomplished through the bipartisan infrastructure. So, as a federal team, we are working to identify which Republicans are vulnerable in our region, and what we can do to sort of like identify these 3 Republicans that we can put pressure on to make sure that we're blocking anything that they try to do over the next 2 years. And like I said, women can certainly be part of that conversation. All right. The next question, what are the prospects of getting some of the defects in the new EV tax credit corrected? I think in the short term, it's going to be really difficult. But I do think that, once we start to really see the benefits of the current EV or electric vehicle tax credit, and the flaws are really more pronounced, I think in 2024 and beyond, when we have another Democratic trifecta, we'll be able to improve the IRA and actually get us closer to something that was proposed in the Build Back Better version that the House passed last year. So short term, don't see any corrections, but 2 to 4 years from now, I definitely see Democrats coming back and sort of closing up the gaps. And it's a lot easier to fix something than then propose it. So this IRA was really important to get a lot of these tax credits in place. And then over the next several years, we can improve it through rulemaking from the administration side, and then also through more congressional action in future Congresses. All right, I think I have one more question directed to me here. What are the prospects of overturning the Supreme Court's egregious decision to restricting the EPA's ability to regulate carbon emissions under the Clean Air Act? Yeah, the Supreme Court, that is a difficult entity to navigate right now with a 6-3 majority on the conservative side. It's going to take years to overturn any bad decisions. And we were certainly not happy with their decision, West Virginia v. EPA. However, I think that in the decision itself, it made it clear that it's still a responsibility of the EPA to regulate emissions. They just restricted their way of which they can do it. So they couldn't make broad decisions that could impact all 50 states. They have to do it more piecemeal. And so, our effort through, Senate majority and also the administration is making sure the EPA and departments like Department of Energy are fully staffed so they can actually do the tedious work of, regulating and implementing the policies that they're supposed to, implement. I see you were thinking more of a legislative fix. Yeah, we've certainly, and our partners have been pushing the administration to take on a legislative fix, but as we know, with that, it hasn't been a priority because they want to we don't have the votes to do regulatory changes. Anything that Democrats can do has to be done through this process of reconciliation because of the filibuster. And so right now, there's no legislative fix for it. The only thing that we can do is through executive action as well as reconciliation. So we're a little ways, and that's why we get involved in this electoral work, so we can expand our climate champion majorities. So then we can get into these legislative fixes and we don't have to worry about the Supreme Court as much. So that means we need to really get ready for 2024 and 2026 to make sure we get Democrats up to 60 votes so we can overcome the filibuster. Or if we get Warnock back in Georgia on December 6th, then we'll have that opportunity to do filibuster reform now and maybe make these changes. So there's still a lot up in the air in terms of who is actually going to control everything. But I think that, in the short term, it's not necessarily on the administration's radar to fix it.
Thank you so much, Quentin. Yeah, I'll open it up for any other questions that folks have for either Quentin about the federal level or me for the implications of these elections for Virginia and our state government. So question is, CCAN going to get involved in the Declare Climate Emergency movement? Yes, and we already have been. I believe our federal team has been working with some of our partners on trying to pressure the Biden administration to declare a climate emergency. But Quentin, do you have any further details around that?
The answer is yes, as you said, and we've sent out a petition. Actually, I was going to say a few weeks ago. At this point, it's probably 3 months ago. We sent out a petition for folks on our CCAN list to actually sign that. It hasn't been high on our federal priority list, but it's definitely something that's on our radar, and we've been participating with others on this.
Thanks for the question. Do we have other questions? We still have a couple minutes. Cool. Well, if anything comes to mind, you are more than welcome to drop it in the chat. And if we have any extra time at the end, we'll go over it. We have a brief question about what are the odds of getting Republican support for environmental action. Quentin, I assume this means at the federal level. I'll ask you to maybe speak on that briefly.
Not very likely. I don't know if anybody's seen that Republicans have officially nominated McCarthy to be their nomination for Speaker of the House, and he's not interested in any environmental climate action at all. So long as the House is a problem, we won't be able to move anything in the next 2 years.
Sorry for the little bit of grim news at the end of our Q&A here. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move on for now. Like I said, you